In my experience, synchronicity is a very difficult thing to talk about. I used to get really frustrated because nobody seemed to understand what I was really trying to say about it. And over time, I've come to recognize that this isn't because I'm a poor communicator, it's because of the concept of synchronicity itself. Synchronicity was defined by Carl Jung as an ACAUSAL connecting principle, which is also the title of his first essay about it from 1952. The connecting principle part of the definition is self-explanatory. It's the acausal part of it that causes the problems with communication. How can a principle that doesn't have any causal structure be of use to us? It's almost like a free radical in the sense that the effects could be unprecedented and unexpected if you were to try and apply such a principle to your own life. So today, I'll be reviewing 3 potential dangers that you might encounter if you try to apply synchronicity in your own experience. And the first is egocentrism. Whenever you talk about a meaningful coincidence in your life, your story will put you at the center of the universe. A skeptical person might respond by saying, "What makes you think you're so special?" Or, "The universe doesn't revolve around you." These are criticisms of egocentrism, which is technically defined as the inability to distinguish between yourself and the world, including other people. It's important to know that you can't defend yourself against egocentrism because you can't talk your way out of your own ego. However, this shows you that synchronicity cannot be interpreted on your behalf by anyone else. The meaning of synchronicity is up to you and you alone. Now, it's true that modern culture promotes egocentrism as an aspect of consumerism, but this egocentrism grounds itself in a product or a brand or a group that makes it more like tribalism. It puts you at the center of a universe that's already been defined by some kind of collective ideology. The ideology of synchronicity is your ideology. The universe you occupy is designed by you. And this kind of isolation can lead to its own problems where you don't have an external reference point to orient yourself in relation to other people. When this happens, we have the second more serious danger of synchronicity, paranoia. Let's say that you experience many synchronicities in a short time frame, a few days or maybe even hours. As these patterns accumulate, they'll reinforce themselves to the point where they might overwhelm you. At this point, the mind can start to work against itself, and this is the literal translation of paranoia. It means against the mind. So if you talk about synchronicity, you might be criticized for egocentrism, which is understandable. But if you persist in your conviction that you've discovered some kind of truth, then people will start to worry about you. Not only are you seeing patterns that aren't really there, you think that they are true. And this suggests that you have access to knowledge of reality that nobody else can understand. The situation I'm describing is depicted in the film A Beautiful Mind. It's a true story about the mathematician John Nash, played by Russell Crowe. Nash suffers from schizophrenia and talks to people that don't exist. Over time, these hallucinations convince Nash that he's been recruited by the American government to intercept Russian codes that are hidden in magazines and newspapers. Nash becomes obsessed with these patterns, to the point where he puts his career and his family at risk. He undergoes electroshock therapy and heavy medication to regain control of his life. In this scene, Nash sees patterns that aren't really there, and he seems unable to control his own perceptions. One of the ways that we can explain this phenomenon is that Nash's mind has been overwhelmed by an acausal connecting principle. Synchronicity is the dangerous method by which his mind is associating unrelated pieces of information to form a massive and delusional conspiracy. So this brings me back to the fundamental issue with the concept of synchronicity. How can patterns projected by our minds lead us to any kind of truth? And what possible truth could be worth the risk of madness? These are big questions that point us towards the ultimate and the most alluring danger of the human condition, the unknown. My favorite story about the unknown is The Truman Show, where Jim Carrey plays Truman Burbank, a man born and raised inside of a massive dome-shaped TV studio. Truman's entire life has been a 24/7 television broadcast known as The Truman Show. And Truman has no idea that this is happening, at least not until he starts to experience synchronicities and question his reality. The best example of this is when he's driving to work and accidentally tunes into the radio station being used by the TV crew.
Okay, he's making his turn onto Lancaster Square.
As Truman becomes more suspicious, his friends and family, who are all actors on the show, try to subdue his paranoia. And here's your spoiler alert, but Truman ultimately follows through on his intuition and escapes from the dome-shaped set of The Truman Show. He risks his life to find out the truth, and eventually discovers that his paranoia was justified after all. The unknown may be dangerous, but once we notice it, we can't ignore it. This is why everyone watching The Truman Show, including us in real life, is inspired by his paranoia. We want Truman to continue down this path because we know it will lead him to something good. So this is the essence of my project on this channel. I want to understand when paranoia is justified, or how it can guide us through the unknown to some kind of truth, or liberation, or enlightenment. I have a personal reason for this. I feel like Nash on some days, but on my good days, I feel more like Truman. I used to personalize this drama in my head, but I've come to realize that this is just the human condition. Everyone has to face these obstacles at some point in their life. So here's how I deal with them in my life. The first essay about synchronicity by Carl Jung in 1952 was published in tandem with another essay by the physicist Wolfgang Pauli. Pauli's essay is titled "The Influence of Archetypal Ideas on the Scientific Theories of Kepler." And yes, it's just as dry as it sounds. But here's why it matters. Wolfgang Pauli was the Walter White of quantum physics. He was a brilliant scientist who broke bad in the seedy underworld of Hamburg, Germany. Between booze, hookers, and violence, Pauli stated that he tended toward being a criminal, a thug, which could have degenerated into my becoming a murderer. Who better to help him than the most famous psychotherapist in Europe? Therapy was good for Pauli, and he kept in touch with Jung for the next 25 years. They were discussing the problem of how to unify physics and psychology. The outcome of their correspondence was this book, which is a single hypothesis known as the Pauli-Jung conjecture. What this means is that synchronicity on its own is an incomplete concept. It's only half a theory, which is another reason why it's dangerous. Jung gave us the ACAUSAL principle, and Pauli gave us the context in which it should be applied. On the surface, Pauli's essay is about the history of science, particularly the discoveries in astronomy made by Johannes Kepler in the early 1600s. But I see it as a strategy for dealing with egocentrism, paranoia, and the unknown. It's a method for conceptualizing these things as dangers and then taking deliberate steps to protect yourself against them. When you think about Pauli's life as a deeply troubled genius, it makes sense that he would look for this kind of a solution in the context of physics and in psychology. I've spent the better part of 10 years evaluating the Pauli-Jung conjecture in my own life, and I think the insight I've gained from it can be useful for other people, especially if you're interested in this area. My next challenge here is to draw out the core lessons from Pauli's essay and separate that from the academic theory that supports them. But that's a challenge for the next video. I'll see you then.